You're welcome. In this part, we'll be talking about the onion skin and the grid. Now, the onion skin, it's a feature that helps you to view your frames before your current frame and the frames after your current frame. It helps to guide you to add your next piece of animation. Now, to begin, I'll make a simple illustration and let's begin. Now, I've done this. Now, I'll add a new keyframe by clicking on this plus sign. Now I'm at keyframe 2, but I don't have any hint on where my first animation was. So now let's access the onion skin. So to access the onion skin, you can do that by clicking on these three dots at the top right corner. Then you can see the onion is not turned on. So I'm going to turn it on. Now I'm going to click on this edit. Now we've turned on the onion skin, but we don't have an hint on where our first animation was. So if we check our canvas, we're at keyframe 2, but there's no preview of where our animation is on keyframe 1. So I'm not having that hint. So if we go back to our onion skin and edit, we have to turn on the frames before and frames after. So if I increase this value to 1, that means I'll have a preview of the first frame I had. Then if I increase this other value to 1, I have a preview of the frames after my current frame. So if I have 3 keyframes and I'm at keyframe 2, I have a preview of what keyframe 3 is. So let's check that. Now you can see I have this kind of transparent gray colored animation preview on my keyframe 2, telling me where my keyframe 1 animation was. So if I write 2 here and then I add another keyframe again and then I write 3. So if I go back to keyframe 2, now you can see I have a preview of keyframe 1 and keyframe 3. But you can also add color to your preview by doing this. If we turn on this feature, the colored, it will give your before frames a red color and your after frame a green color to identify better. Now you can see my before frame is painted red while my after frame is painted green to give me that more understanding of where my animations are. So there are other features for you to set. Now we also have, if you click on this loop, if you turn it on, that means it's going to give you a preview of what your first frame is when you are the last frame. So it's it's kind of like an hint when you are making an animation that is like looping over and over again. It gives you a preview of your first frame when you are at the last frame. So even if you turn on your before frames to be 1 and your after frame to be 1, it will give you a preview of your last frame if you are on the starting of your animation, and to give you a preview of your first frame if you are the last frame of your animation. So now if I add another keyframe and then I do this and write 4, I repeat that same action again and then I write 5. Now you can see what it's actually doing. It's giving me a preview of my before frame, which is 4, and giving me a preview of my first frame, which is 1. So if I go back to 1, now you can see it's giving me a preview of my last frame, which is 5. So it's helpful when you are making an animation that is looping over and over again, let's say a walking animation. So that feature is very useful for that. Now if we head back to our onion skin and we click on this arrow on our before frame, now you can see there's another set of values. Now this one set at 50% means the transparency, the intensity of your frames, you're starting before frames. So if you're at keyframe 3, that means keyframe 2 will be very intense while keyframe 1 will be less intense. So if we set our frames before to 2, and let's check that out. So if we go back to keyframe 3, now you can see we can see 2 keyframes before our current frames, which is keyframe 3. Now you can see keyframe 2 is more intense while keyframe 1 is less intense because of this value, which is set to 50% and 20%. So if we increase this to 100, That means keyframe 2 will be very intense in our preview. Now you can see that. So that's for these other values over here. Then if you set this, now let me bring back to my default value first. Okay, so you can also apply that same settings to your keyframes after. So if I close this tab and then I open my keyframe after, then I set this to 2 and it's already at the default value, and then I go back, you can see this intensity. Keyframe 4 is more intense than keyframe 5. So that's for the transparency of your onion skin. Then there's another value set to 0 currently for now. So let me do something. Let me turn off my loop so it does not interfere with what I want to do. Then I turn this to 1. That means it's going to skip one frame and preview the next. Since we are at keyframe 3, it's going to skip keyframe 2 and preview keyframe 1. So this is very helpful for when you are making a lengthy animation, you have a lot of frames and you want to view, and then you set this your keyframes to preview to the maximum value, which is 5, to be helpful for you to view keyframes other than the next before your current animation. So if we go back to our canvas, now you can see keyframe 2 is skipped and keyframe 1 is previewed because we set that value to 1. So it skips one frame and preview the other. We can also apply that same setting to our keyframe 2. If you do that and then we go back, now you can see it skipped keyframe 4 and previewed keyframe 5. So that is the function of this feature, to skip frames for you to preview the next one. So that's it on the onion skin. Now for the grid is only a guide to help you draw. It won't show up in your final animation. Now to access the grid, you click on the 3 dots at your top right corner. Now you can see the grid is not turned on, so you can turn that on. Now if you turned it on, so let's go back to our canvas. Now you can see there are a bunch of lines here guiding us on where to draw our animation. So if we go back to the settings, now there are 3 options here. To set the opacity of your grid lines, it's set to 25 as default. So if you increase this to a higher value, your grid lines will be very visible. Now if we go back, now you can see it's very visible. So if you reduce this, so if you reduce this to a lower value, let's say it was 25 as the default, so let's say 10. Now it will be less visible for you to see. Then the other option, let me bring it back to our default at 5, which is the line spacing. Now, we have two of them, the vertical and the horizontal line spacing. This one is to increase the number of rows in your grid, while this one is to increase or reduce the number of columns in your grid. So if you increase our opacity to 100, now you can see it's the spacing for the rows and the columns. Now, if you turn on our pixel effect on our layer, then we click on this arrow. Now, if we go back to this, now you can see pixel effect. Now, if we increase this to, let's say 20, now what this does, it automatically snaps your lines as you draw in the canvas to the grid. I won't recommend you turn this on except maybe if you are to do a pixel effect animation. So now let's try that out. Now you can see it's kind of automatically snapping our brush to the grid to help us draw. So the effect of this pixel effect, it kind of makes your animation kind of blurry. So I won't recommend you turning this on. So that's for the grid. Now finally, for the benefit of you turning on the grid, it helps to estimate two distances between two objects in your animation, because it helps to figure out how far apart two objects should be in the animation, and finally it serves as a reference point. So that's all for now. Hope to see you in the next one. Peace out.